Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar on how to score 760 on the GMAT. My name is Rajat Sedana. I'm one of the co-founders of eGMAT, and I'm going to be your main host today. Supporting me in this webinar is Manas. Manas is a GMAT strategy expert. He's actually one of the most experienced GMAT strategy experts at eGMAT, and he's going to be a co-host today. In this webinar, we're going to look at how to build your study plan. We're going to start with the foundation of what the GMAT tests, and then from there on, we're going to use that foundation to address some of the biggest misconceptions that you have about the GMAT. And then from that point on, we're going to look at how do you build a study plan? What does it take to execute that study plan successfully? What are some of the key faltering points that people have? And how do you track your progress as you're executing that study plan? Overall, this is going to be about a 2 hour and 10-minute long session, if prior sessions are any indication. And towards the end of the webinar, I will also reserve some time if you have questions that have still not been answered. During the webinar, I'll reserve that time to answer those questions. But before we get in, we have a fantastic free trial, whether you want to learn sentence correction, critical reasoning on reading comprehension. We have some introductory concepts over there. Welcome you to try that free trial out. Look at concepts on verb ed or verb ing modifiers. If you think you want to sample reading comprehension, you can look at concepts on main point 1 and 2. Critical reasoning, you have CR pre-thinking, you have boldface concepts as well. And then on quant, you have geometry, algebra, and number properties. So you kind of get a fair share of the content regardless of what you wanna try out. We also have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free geometry webinar that's tomorrow, in exactly 24 hours. And this we're gonna focus on quadrilaterals, and we're gonna go from the very basics to the most challenging questions. If you've not registered for that, you can register for this. Then we also have a sentence correction webinar that is that's a week from now. In this, we're going to look at the famous meaning-based approach that eGMAT pioneered about a decade back, and we're in our third generation of that approach. And we're going to solve some of the most challenging sentence correction questions using that approach. And we're going to demonstrate why meaning rules on GMAT sentence correction. One of the other things that we do and our students, our former students do, is that we give back, and we've been running this series called MB Analytical, and through which we've been inviting our former students to talk about various aspects, leadership, letter of recommendations, how do you get into Harvard, Wharton, Stanford. These are people who've been there, who've done that. How do you get into McKinsey, and so on and so forth. This week, we have a session with Leonardo, as we call him. He's a Wharton MBA alumnus, and he's someone who actually did really well on the GMAT. He scored a 750. He's going to talk about how do you overcome that imperfect profile and get into one of the top B schools, and he actually also got some scholarship from Wharton. So yeah, if you have not registered for this one, do register for this one as well. With that, let's get to know you guys a bit better. I want to figure out when do you plan to take the test, and then let's also get to know what your target GMAT score is. Here's the poll question for your target GMAT score. So when do people plan to take the test? A majority of you plan to take the test. Have not taken a date as of yet. You can see about 42% of you have mentioned that. Then we have the next biggest segment is those who have between a month and a month and a half and 2.5 months. Then we have between a month and 45 days. That's about 36 of you. And then we have a few folks who have their test right away. All right, that's wonderful. Thank you. And then with regards to the target GMAT scores, majority is in that 730 to 750 bracket. That's wonderful to know, because that's where we recommend that you get to if you are looking for scholarships. We have about 15% in that 710, 720, and about twice as many in the 760 or higher bracket. All right. Let me go into the presentation pane, and the screen will have changed for you. You should be seeing the slide which says how do you score 95th percentile or better on the GMAT. Now let me just walk you through the format over here a bit. So what you see is the presentation part, and below that is the Q&A or a question and answer part. Throughout the webinar, if you have any question about the content, and I'll be very specific about the content that I'm talking about, feel free to ask a question here, and that way Manas can respond to that question, and that way your question does get answered, and we do go through the webinar. Oftentimes, I'll ask some poll questions. Most of those poll questions will be on this right-hand pane. You should be able to see a yes/no poll right now over there. Please, if you're here in the webinar, participate in those poll questions, and then we'd be happy to. And you'd find that you'd get a lot more out of this webinar. I mean, you're spending this time with us. Make the most of it. Get that one step closer to your target GMAT score. And Premnath says, how long does it take for a student to go from 630 to 750? Premnath, you'll get the answer to that question in this webinar. In fact, you'll get a very personalized answer to this question. With that, let's kind of talk about why is it that you should aim for that score of 730 or higher. And most of you are aiming for about 70% of you are aiming for that score of 730 or higher. And I can tell you that only about 6% of the people get to that score or so. And it's difficult. So the fact that you are here, congratulations, you've taken the first step. You're spending your time on a Saturday, whether it's a morning or an evening with me, and that's one of the indicators that you're willing to put in the effort. But as you go through this journey, you're going to find that you need additional motivation. Why? Because getting there is not easy, regardless of what people tell you. It's difficult. It requires a lot of persistence. It requires a lot of self-control. I'm going to give you some data points to hopefully keep you motivated throughout this journey. Okay. So with that, I have 3 reasons why you should aim for that score of 730 or higher. One is top B schools need that score. I mean, if you're looking for a top B school, you require that score right now. The second is, if you're looking for scholarships, and USB schools do give out a ton of scholarships, more than 50% of that scholarship money goes to students who get to that score of 730 or higher, and that's something which eGMATers get about $45 million worth of scholarships every year. We've delivered upwards of $200 million of cumulative scholarships in the last 7 to 8 years, which is when we've been tracking data or so. And so you need that 730 or higher score if you want scholarships. And the third is, if you look at the delta in total earnings over a 10-year period, those who actually graduate from a tier 1 versus a tier 2 school, that's at least $500,000 right now, and that delta has been increasing overall. So, and that 730 will help you get to the tier 1 school. Here's some data to back that claim with regards to B schools need that top B school, that top GMAT score. You can see where median scores have been shifting more towards that 730 mark over here. You're going to also notice 2 things. There's no Stanford, there's no Harvard here. Why? Because even in 2014, both these schools were there at that 730 mark. When you look at the top 25 schools, the median GMAT scores have increased at 23 out of the top 25 schools. At the 24th school, the score has remained the same because it was already very high. And at the 25th school, the score has slightly dropped because, again, it was reasonably high. There are certain schools such as Sloan, such as Columbia, that provide enhanced stats. And what they've really told us is that, hey, 80% of the admitted class at these schools have a score of 700 or higher. Essentially, what these schools are telling you is that if you don't have a 700, don't even bother applying. And this is despite the fact that between 2014 to 2018, we had a 15% decline in test taking population or so. So that's I think a very stark statistic, and in 2020 and now again in 2021, which is this session, in the last 2 years we've had an increase in applications. So the competition in 2021 is higher than what it was in 2018. Okay. And this trend actually continues beyond the top 25. If you're not aiming for that top 25, it doesn't mean that you get off. So you look at the dots over here. These ones are all schools in the 26 to 50 range, and you can see that GMAT scores have gone up as well. Again, essentially whatever top 25 do, the next tier follows suit. And so that is statistical data. Here's some anecdotal data. So these are some of our former students. Nishant, who scored a 690, was rejected by a bunch of schools, scored a 740 and received admits as well as a scholarship from Columbia. And again, the nice thing about applying to schools such as the Tuck or a Smeal is that even when they reject you, they give you a very concrete reason. That's why I love Tuck as a school. And Tuck told Nishant, we love your candidacy, your GMAT score is just not up to the mark. Similarly, Pravi scored a 680, applied to a bunch of schools, didn't get a single interview invite. Just before the deadline, she updated that score to 740, and within 7 hours, she received 5 interview invites. She received a total of, I think, $220,000 worth of scholarship money. KK, who's Krishnakant, received 15 rejections with a score of 680, and then improved that score to 720 and received 5 full fellowships. I think the key thing with KK was that the same schools that rejected him with a 680 gave him a full ride with a 720, which was, I think, wonderful. He's actually just about to graduate from Georgia Tech, or he's just graduated from Georgia Tech. And he's now starting at Amazon. Okay. Bottom line is, over the last few years, the GMAT scores become way more important than it was when I took the GMAT, which was in the first decade of the 21st century. The second reason why you should aim for that score is scholarships. I mean, doing an MBA is expensive, and scholarships do help you with that. And I can personally tell you from my own journey, I didn't have to pay a single penny for my MBA because I had multiple full fellowships. And when you think about USB schools, they offer about $350 million worth of total scholarships, and these are merit-based scholarships, which means they're not special need, they're not special reserve scholarships. These are purely based on merit, and based on our data that we have. About 55% of that money goes to students, these 6,000 students who score 740 or higher. Pretty much all of that goes to students who score 710 or higher. What this means is that if you get a score of 740 and you apply properly, you should get about 40K of scholarship amount. And again, there are two factors that decide scholarships. One is your GMAT score. The second is your likability during that interview. And again, has anecdotal data. This is the data that I presented was statistical. Now this is anecdotal. Two of our former students, Mansi and Victor, scored 770. One got a full ride from Ross and Keenan Flagler. The second got a 90,000 scholarship from Mansi. Kong Bui, scored a 760. He got 5 full scholarships. He actually got a very special scholarship from Bohaya Fisher, where he not only got a full ride, but the school paid him $1,700 per month. This is per month to study there. So this was he got living expenses to do an MBA. Similarly, Nishant, you can see the scholarship amounts and KK and Pravi as well. In fact, this is a very interesting thing. We've had 3 or 4 of such journeys that we've seen. So Ayush, one of our former students, applied to Ross with a score of 710. He got interviewed with Ross, and essentially his interview went really well, but he was still waitlisted. So I reached out to the school and said, "Hey, what happened? I thought we really connected during the interview." And both schools told him, they said, yes, you were great, but your GMAT score is not high enough. So he prepared again, improved to a 750, and turned that scholarship. He didn't even apply again. He actually just updated that score, and that scholarship became that waitlist became an admit with scholarship. And you can watch, I think right now, about 170 such instances. So this is about 2 months old, this presentation. So you can watch now 170 such instances on our YouTube channel. Also, if you want to connect with these students, you can connect with me on my LinkedIn. Most of these students are connected with me on my LinkedIn, and Manas can get you the link in the Q&A part. And here is a quote that John Fuller, one of the former admissions directors at Ross, said. He said, "Someone with a 770 is way more likely to get a financial reward. Why? Because the school wants to buy that high GMAT score." Let's look at the third difference, which is the delta in total earnings over here over a 10-year period. And to do that, I'm going to compare two schools, Babson and MIT. And the reason why I compare these two schools is because they're in Boston. Boston is a major metro, but it's not a crazy place to live in, which New York is or San Francisco is. So the salaries are not inflated over there because of that. And when you compare these two schools, which are both of them are in Boston, they're about 20 miles away. 70% of the graduates from both these schools get a job within the New England area. so uh, so essentially, you look at the numbers over here. The first year earning delta is about 60 grand or so. This, by the way, this excludes the equity bonus, sign-on equity that people from MIT get, but most people from Babson do not get that. But even if you consider that delta to be about 45K, why? Because you're not going to get a bonus every year. That still translates to $500,000 or 450K of net salary that comes in for you. Okay, so again, getting to that 730 or higher is difficult, but it's worth the effort. Okay, so with that, let's get into the core of this session. And again, if you've seen this before, I know if you're a former student, you probably have seen this introduction. We get about 60% of the people for whom this is their first introduction with eGMAT, and I need to push those people. I think it's really important that they get the same motivation that you guys have gotten in the past. Okay, so thank you for sustaining through that. And with that, let's go right into the core of this session, which is how do you go about acing the GMAT. Now, there's one thing that I want you to remember about acing the GMAT. It is that 80% of what acing the GMAT is about is this thing over here. And the reason why I want to make sure that I want to emphasize that to this degree is because even though people know this, they don't emphasize on this. They actually focus a whole lot on solving questions quickly. They focus on how am I going to attempt the test? What's the section order going to be? Which questions am I going to actually skip? And how am I going to build that stamina to sustain myself through a 3-hour and 6-minute test? Now, these things are important, but all of these combined probably account for about 20%, if that. And by the way, if you don't have ability, they don't matter anyway. Okay, so this is really important for you to know that acing the GMAT is about building ability. Okay, and to just prove my point, I want to talk about two things. And the reason why I want to talk about accuracy versus ability is because when we prepare for the GMAT, the term that we focus 10 times more than ability is accuracy. When we take a quiz, we really say, okay, how many questions did I get right? And which again is a misleading term on the GMAT. So what is accuracy? When you take a quiz and you solve a bunch of questions, it's the percentage of questions that you answer correctly. And essentially accuracy, think of it as an absolute number. It doesn't have a rank associated with it. Why? Because when we say my accuracy is this, we don't take into account how difficult a question or how difficult doing a task was. Okay. Ability, on the other hand, is a comparative measure. It's not an absolute measure. It's a comparative measure. It says how good you are compared to other test takers. Again, case in point, you may take a quiz and may have 80% accuracy. Your ability might still be 50th percentile. Why? Because if pretty much half the people who take the quiz get 8 or more questions right, this means that if you get 8 right, you're at that 50th percentile point. On the other hand, if you take a quiz that has uber hard question, then you get 7 out of those 10 questions correctly, your ability might be 90th percentile for the obvious reasons. Okay, and just to prove my point, I'm going to really talk about how an adaptive test algorithm works. The GMAT follows the same principle. It's a bit more sophisticated application of this particular principle, but essentially, if you know this, you'd be able to figure out how the GMAT works as well. So what we have on this is our attempts of two students, student 1 and student 2. We call them case 1 and case 2. And essentially on the y-axis, they have difficulty level of questions. So which means the higher you go on y-axis, so the higher you go here, the more difficult questions become. And on the x-axis, we have question number, so 1 to 6 are on the x-axis. And if you're someone who actually reads charts really well, you can probably predict what's going to happen. But let's go step by step. So we're going to start with case 1 or student 1. Gets the first question usually you get when you get an adaptive test is of that medium difficulty level. It's kind of the best place to start. Student 1 answers that question correctly, gets this next question, which is slightly more challenging. He or she then gets that question right as well. And you can know this is a bit more challenging. Why? Because this is higher on the y-axis than question number 1. Then he gets the next question, gets that wrong. Then gets the fourth question, which is between the difficulty level of which is between that of question number 3 and question number 2. How do you know that? If you draw horizontal lines from here, you can see question 4 is between question 3 and question 2. He gets that right and gets the next question, which is slightly more difficult. He gets that wrong. Okay, so that's case 1 or student 1. Case 2 or student 2 gets the first question again. Medium difficulty level, gets that wrong, gets the second question, which is slightly easier, gets that right, gets the third question, a bit more challenging between question 1 and question 2, gets that wrong, gets the fourth question that is easier, and gets the fifth question, which is slightly more challenging, and gets that correct as well. So if at this point, if I were to stop the test, and there's a question that Tyler has, and it's a great question, which section is it covering? It could be either quant or verbal, because both of those sections are adaptive. The test behaves in a very, very similar manner for them, for both these. So if you were to think about this, and you say, okay, if I were to stop the test at the end of question number 5, who do you think will be doing better? Student 1 or student 2? Who do you think would end up with a higher score if we stop the test at this point? Let's get a few more responses. I have about 260 students here. I have about 100 responses so far. Let's get to 120 responses, guys. Who do you think is doing better? Come on, put a stake in the ground. Make a bet. 3, 2, and 1. I have 150 responses, and about 81% of you say that student 1's doing better. That's wonderful. Let's kind of look at this and get another question. Why do you think student 1's doing better? Because their accuracy is identical. So what makes student 1 perform better or get a higher score? What makes student 1 get a higher score? Okay, difficulty level of questions answered. He got difficult questions. He started strong. All right. Same number of questions, but higher difficulty level. Yes, that's wonderful. And that's exactly what I want you to take away from this. So when you think about this, the reason why student 1's doing better is because he got 5 questions. Each one of them was at least at the average difficulty level, which was the first question, or above the average difficulty level, which was, question numbers 2 to 5. Student 2, on the other hand, was served only one question, and that was at the average difficulty level. Every other question that student 2 got was easier. Now, as we know, or if you don't know, then you now know that difficult questions can have as many as 3x as many points as easier questions or so. So when you look at the points that each one of these students gets, and you really say look at the weight for each question, multiply this with the fact that whether the student got this correct or not, you're going to really find student 1 has more points than student 2 does. Okay. Now, when I say that the GMATs are test of ability, the reason why I say that is because you have 2 challenges that you need to overcome. One is that you need to get difficult questions served to you. On the GMAT, there is this thing called a question picker, which actually selects questions, which questions should to serve to you, and you've got to really push that question picker to serve difficult questions to you. Why? Because difficult questions give you about 3x as many points as easy questions do. And then the second challenge that you have is to answer them correctly, because without answering them correctly, you can't really make that question picker pick and serve difficult questions to you. Okay. Again, remember your GMAT score is governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. For those of you who actually make inferences from data, and again are someone who actually can see through data, you can even infer if a difficult question gives you 3 times as many points as an easy question does, then on a test, if you are able to get 20 difficult questions served to you and answer them correctly, then you're going to get more points than if you actually answer 30 easy questions correctly. Just doing that simple math. So again, the takeaway, your GMAT score is governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. So Shikhar has a great question. Says, so would it mean that case 2, after getting the first question incorrect, will have to answer more questions correctly to reach a similar level as that of case 1? So that's a great question, Shikhar. So I can say you're kind of thinking in the right direction, but your inference is not precisely correct. Why? Because if it so happens that case 2 makes a mistake on the first question and then continues to answer a bunch of questions correctly, even when those questions are very difficult, then just based on the difficulty level, case 2 could score higher, or even at this could score similar or even higher if essentially he answers more and more difficult questions. But yes, but that's something that you're thinking in the right direction, Shikhar. Which also means another inference that you can get out of this is, a lot of people worry about answering the first question correctly. You can make a mistake as long as you don't make a mistake on. Actually, I'm going to talk about that inference. So in a few slides. Is there an indication? Again, please don't put that question in the Q&A part, in the short answer part on the right. Is there an indication what the difficulty level is? Absolutely not. The GMAT will not tell you. Okay. Now, so this was just an adaptive test principle. In principle, how an adaptive test works. What you have is now data from a GMAT prep test, which is an official GMAT test from 2018. And for those of you who are reasonably new to the GMAT world, and most of you are in the context that I'm talking about, prior to May of 2018, the GMAT was a 4-hour long test, and at that time, the verbal section was about 41 questions, the quant section was 36 questions, and the official mocks were the GMAT prep mocks, which actually were a separate desktop application. They allowed us to get a lot of insights on how the GMAT works. And this is a screenshot from 2 attempts by 2 different students on that GMAT prep test. So this is, on GMAT prep, this uses the same algorithm that your actual test does, at least the GMAT claims. And when you look at these 2 screenshots, the red rectangles are those where people made mistakes in this. And for these 2 students, if you were to really look at them, between question numbers 11 and 41, their accuracy is identical. Both of them have made 9 mistakes over here. But the only difference here is that this guy made 2 mistakes in question numbers 1 and 2. Okay. And if you were to think about it, and if you were to look at this purely through a lens of accuracy, what you would see is that they seem very similar, but the GMAT doesn't look at them through a lens of accuracy. So which is why the GMAT actually treats both these students very differently. Student 1 got a score of V43, which is 97th percentile on the GMAT. Student 2 got a score of V32, which is 65th percentile on the GMAT. And essentially, when you think about this, how many of you, when you really say, hey, when you look at this and say, man, the GMAT's really harsh, I'm going to put in a yes/no poll over here, and I want you to tell me, what do you think about the GMAT? How many of you say, hey, the GMAT's really harsh, it's really unfair for the GMAT to do that? I'm going to remove broadcast results. If you think the GMAT's really harsh, select yes. If you think the GMAT's not harsh, it's fairly fair, then select no. Let's get a few more responses. I want to see your emotions when it comes to the GMAT. I have 140 responses, 146, 150 again. Wonderful. Thank you very much for this wonderful participation. Let me broadcast the results in the poll. But 57% of you think that the GMAT's really harsh, 43% of you think it's not, and I'm glad that 43% of you think that it's not. By the way, if the GMAT were truly harsh, it will be good for test prep companies such as us, because we could make you those promises that most prep companies do, but actually the GMAT's not very harsh. The GMAT's very forgiving. Why? When people look at this, and this was kind of very similar to a DS problem where you see two statements. Each of these cases are two different. Each of these cases is two different statements, and when you look at this, you're looking at this in combination. But people forget to look at this in isolation. If you look at just this guy over here, he made 9 mistakes out of 41 questions. Was still able to be there in the top 3 percentile of students. And that's incredible. I mean, you get a quarter of questions wrong, or almost a quarter of questions wrong, and still get into the top 3 percentile. That's incredible. Don't you guys think? If you look at the V43 guy, right? It's incredible. It allows you to make that many mistakes. Okay. So, and again, you guys are still confused, and that's why understanding a principle well is really important. Now let's look at this V32 guy, and what a lot of you are saying, and I can see the inferences come in over here, is that does it imply performing well is initially is really important, or if you make a mistake early on, then there's no coming back from it? The answer to both of those questions is no, and I'm going to explain that in a couple of slides, and why that much difference. If you understand the principle of an adaptive test, you'd be able to see that why that is the case. So let's talk about case 2, student 2. What was the difficulty level of the first question that we said? What was the difficulty level of the first question? Let me just clear your answers that he got. It was a medium difficulty level, a 50th percentile. I am someone who hates to be wrong when it comes to mathematics. So it's a 50th percentile question, okay? Now, how many of you, anyone over here who's a statistician? Anyone over here who's a statistician? If you want to just say yes, raise your hand. One of those, just say yes. I think the raise hand function is disabled. Anyone over here a statistician, works in stats, or is someone who's generally good in math? Anyone who says I'm good in math? Yes, okay. So think of a standard normal distribution, and if you're studying for the GMAT, you don't need to know this. This is from my algorithm design days. Think of a standard normal distribution. If you're a 90th percentile guy, which means that the peak of that standard normal for your segment of people is at that 90th percentile, what is and with a standard deviation of 15 percentile on either side, what is the likelihood that you're going to get a 50th percentile question wrong? Can you guys tell me? If you're at a median percentile of 90th, that's kind of where the peak of the standard normal distribution is, and with a standard deviation of 15 percentile, what is the likelihood that you're going to get a 50th percentile question which is more than 2 standard deviations away wrong? Not likely. Not likely. That's, I think, less than 1 in 1,000. Okay. What is the likelihood that you're going to get a 50th percentile question wrong and a 30th percentile question wrong, one after the other? What's that joint probability that you're going to get a 90th percentile guy is going to get a 50th percentile and a 30th percentile question wrong, one after the other, and the guy who says 0.00001 is actually very, very close to the answer. Okay, so at this point, question number 2, when the guy has already made that wrong, that question picker that we talked about, is not very wrong to think this guy is not super smart. Okay, right? So this question number 3 that he's getting is that 15th percentile question, and essentially he got that right. Then question number 4 is that 20th percentile question, he got that right. 5 is essentially a 30th percentile question. 6 is a 40th percentile question, and basically it took that algorithm, the question picker, about 8 or 9 questions to solve him 700, 600, 700 level questions over there. Okay, student 1 on the other hand started getting difficult questions at question number 6 or 7. He continued to answer them correctly. Okay, So so that's kind of how the GMAT works. Now you guys look at this and say, okay, a difference of 2 questions in terms of accuracies. That's not how the GMAT looks at you. The GMAT looks at you through a lens of abilities. So when you look at these 2 students, and these are abilities that the GMAT computes internally for each one of you. So this is the verbal subsection. And when you look at the 97th percentile guy through the lens of ability and compare him or her to a 65 percentile student, can you see that they look very, very, very different? Can you see that? Okay, and that's what the GMAT looks at, and which is why I say that the GMAT's a test of ability. Why? Because that's directly what it measures. It gives you an ability score. That score out of 800 is an ability score. It's composed of quant and verbal scores, which by themselves are ability scores, and those scores are composed of these subsectional scores, which by themselves are ability scores or comparative scores as well. Again, your GMAT scores governed by your ability to answer difficult questions correctly. Okay, so your GMAT score is composed of 5 subsectional percentiles. You can't see this word percentiles over here. Adobe messed it up. So what are those subsectional percentiles? You have 2 in quant, algebra, geometry, and arithmetic, and then 3 in verbal, SC, CR, and RC. Okay. Now there are certain points that that you need to know. First of all, each of these is independent, which means the difficulty level of questions served in SC have no bearing on how you perform in CR. So you might mess your CR up, but if you're doing well in SC, you'll still get difficult questions in SC. Similarly, you might mess your algebra up, but if you're doing really well in arithmetic, you'll still get difficult questions in arithmetic. The second thing is that each of them has an equal weight. Okay, and I see a question by Rahul is saying, is GMAT verbal more important? No, it's not. Verbal and quant have an equal weight. Similarly, within verbal, SC, CR, and RC have equal weights too. A lot of people say, man, RC is more has a higher weight. No, it doesn't. Or SC has a higher weight, or CR is not as important because it has a few questions. No, that's not the case. It's just that the GMAT doesn't require you to solve that many questions to estimate your ability in critical reasoning. Okay. And GMAT verbal is not vocab heavy like the GRE. Those are 2 very different tests. In fact, you don't need a whole lot of vocab on the GMAT anyway. The third thing, you need a target ability for each subsection. If you want to get to a score of 730, there are about, so for these 5 subsectional abilities, there are about 25 combinations that can get you to a score of 730. Depending on what your natural strengths and what your natural weaknesses are, you know, for each one of you, there's a unique combination that is most suitable. For example, and in principle, you know this, if you're someone who's strong in quant, it's much more, if you aim for a Q50 and a V39, that's going to be a much more likely score for you to get to a 730 than if you aim for a V44 and a corresponding Q47 or Q48. Okay, why? Because you're leveraging your strengths. It just makes sense, you know. If I'm Google, I'm not going to focus on my office revenue to make up my numbers. I'm going to focus on my search revenue. If I'm Microsoft, I'm going to focus more on my Office 365 and Azure revenue to make my numbers. Again, that's each one of these companies has its strengths, and that's the same principle that applies to you. Jens asked the same question: is though they're scored independently, does the difficulty level presented in one subcategory influence the difficulty level? No, Jen, it doesn't. That's exactly my point. The whole definition of independence is the difficulty level doesn't matter. In fact, we have ESRs where someone scored 0 percentile in RC and has gotten 90th percentile in SC and CR. Okay. So you need to know, if you want to get to that 730 score, you need to know what is your target ability going to be in each subsection. And then the other thing, which is the last piece over here, is the process of building ability in each subsection is identical. The stages of learning that you go through is identical. Okay. And the piece which is there is, if you understand these 4 points, getting to that 730 is, I mean, I talked about it and said only 3% of students get there. if you understand these points, if you hit the metrics around this, there's an 80% chance you can get to that score of 730. Okay, and I'm going to demonstrate that. So this entire webinar is going to be translating each of these points into their corresponding best practices. Okay, so but the takeaway that I want you to have is ask yourself, you think about a 730, you should automatically have this in your mind. What abilities am I aiming for in these subsections if I'm thinking about a 730 or a 760 or a 770 or so. Okay, again, acing the GMAT's about building ability. The other thing, we talked about a principle. That was the chart where we compared two students. Then we talked about a GMAT prep example where we had one student make two more mistakes than the other. This is an official ESR from one of our former students who improved from a V17, which is a 16th percentile on verbal, to a V40, which is a 91st percentile on verbal. And you guys can download his ESR and you can see this for yourself. This is the fifth one, and let me just launch this for you so you guys can download his ESR. Now, the thing which is there, the reason why I have his ESR over here is because essentially this demonstrates that you can make mistakes on the GMAT and still do well. This is, if you look at his ESR, this is how he did on the verbal section of the GMAT. Again, this is the old attempt, 41 questions. What you see is he did really well on the first two blocks over here. And why? Because, again, it makes sense here. The difficulty level of questions was medium. Here it was medium hard. When he started getting hard questions, that's when he made mistakes. And the GMAT allows you to make mistakes as long as they're on the hard questions, and he can still get a 91st percentile. V40 is a 91st percentile on GMAT verbal. Okay. So another takeaway that I want you to have is that you can make mistakes and still get a very high score. And this is something which is on quant, verbal, which again results in the high GMAT score, as long as you don't make mistakes on easy questions. That's basically it. Hard questions, absolutely. And that's kind of the definition of this. Okay. So then let's answer some key questions, because these are questions you've been asking over here in this case, which is, hey, do the first 10 questions matter? Should I approach them differently? And should I spend more time on the first 10 questions? And again, here are the answers to that. Do they matter? Yes, they do. Should you approach them differently? Absolutely not. Let me just make sure. Over here. And should you spend more time on the first 10 questions? No, you should not spend. That actually might hurt your score. How many of you are confused with this response? You say, man, if they are important, why is Rajat saying, should you approach them differently? And no, that would be wrong. Okay, very good. Let's just talk about why that is the case. And again, all of this is based on the principles that we already know. All right. It's a typical CR question here, and I love critical reasoning. It's actually one of the best subsections on the GMAT. Really, really relevant on the GMAT as well as in true life as well. Okay. Remember, and can you write this down? You can make mistakes and still get a high score as long as those mistakes are on hard questions. Okay. So let's kind of take an example. Let's say Melissa. Melissa, her ability is 90th percentile on GMAT, and we can take it on any subsection, SC, CR, RC, arithmetic, algebra. The numbers would remain the same. What this translates into is that if her ability is 90th percentile, which means that if she gets a medium difficulty question, her probability to get that question wrong is 10% at the most. Her accuracy on medium difficulty question is going to be 90%. Okay, and these are worst case numbers that I'm really saying. Okay, so if you are Melissa, do you really think that you will actually get the first question wrong if you are Melissa? If that first question is of medium difficulty level, do you think you're going to get that wrong? No, you're not. Your regular approach towards that first question is and if that's medium difficulty level, you're going to get it right, because that's by virtue of who you are. Okay, if You get a medium hard question. The very fact that Melissa is a 90th percentile student, the probability of that getting incorrect is 20%. Okay, and again, these are worst case numbers. The probability of you getting a hard question wrong is 35%. Now, if it so happens that you get the first question as a hard question, which is very unlikely, in some cases it happens, but it's very, very unlikely, then even when you get it wrong, it doesn't matter. Why? Because the GMAT takes that into account. But 80 to 90% of the time, that first question is of a medium difficulty level, because that's the best stage for any estimation engine to start from. Okay. So again, you're likely to answer all of those medium questions correctly, because this is who you are. Okay. And even if you get that first question as wrong, you're not going to get penalized. In fact, I have seen ESRs that people have gotten made mistakes in the first block or so, and they've gotten done really well. Why? Because that first block had hard questions. Medium is actually 600 level. Medium hard is 650. Okay. Now, what's the problem with spending more time on the first 10 questions? Can anyone tell me? What is the problem with spending more time on the first 10 questions? A, you can't complete the test. That's good. What's another problem? No time for hard questions, time wastage, okay, rushing through this. All of this is good. There's another problem which you're missing. Think about how many of you play sports? How many of you play sports? Okay, which sport do you play? Can you write it down? Basketball, badminton, tennis, soccer, cricket. Okay, now tell me, let's kind of take, I'm going to take badminton. Let's take tennis as a sport. Tennis is a bit more universal, although I love cricket the most, but tennis is a bit more universal. Let's say, you have an easy opponent against you, and you are serving, okay, and you normally serve at 140 kilometers an hour, which I think is a reasonably paced serve in tennis. Now, if you change how you serve, even though you have an easy opponent, do you think you're likely to hit the same accuracy and same precision as you normally do? If you change how you serve, if you kind of change your body posture a bit, or if you change the grip of your racket? No, you're not. Okay. In the same way, when you spend more time, and it seems very counterintuitive, if you spend more time, which means you're trying to solve a medium question differently from how you usually do, you're not going to hit that 90% accuracy. Your likelihood of making a mistake is going to go up. Does that make sense? Because that likelihood is built on that. I mean, if you're Ronaldo, you shouldn't worry about, hitting a ball in an empty goal, right? This is kind of what this is. So the takeaway from this is, which is on there on the next slide, by the way, focus on building ability, and don't consider the test to be something very different from what you consider practice to be. Okay, that's the takeaway. All right. So let's now talk about the piece which is that does that make sense? Approach the test the same way you do practice. Okay. Now we've talked about each subsection has equal weight. Now we're going to look at why is it that you need a target ability for each subsection. Okay. And how can you get one? So we're going to focus on this piece. As I said, this entire session is about that. Okay. So let's go there. Now, as I said, there are many ways to get to your target GMAT score. How do you decide which is the best way for you? And for this, we built this tool called a personalized study plan. And this, we were the first company to do this. And I think even today, we are the only company that does this. There's actually one other company that tries to do this, that's built by our former employees who actually, I think, pretty much copied the way that we do. Okay, so let's just look at what a study plan does. And think about the GMAT. You have to think about the study plan and say, what does it do? So a study plan essentially answers three questions. The first question that it answers is, how will I reach my GMAT score? So what's that combination of subsectional abilities that I'm going to figure out that will help me get there in the most optimum amount of time? Okay. The second thing is how much time do I need to get there? So if my current ability in SC is 50th percentile, my target ability is 90th, how long would it take for me to get from that 50th percentile to 90th percentile? And similarly in CR, similarly in number properties, similarly in word problems, and so on and so forth. And then the last piece is, where am I going to put that time? I mean, where would I put that time in? Okay, so am I going to put that time in learning concepts? Am I going to put that time in practicing questions? How much of that time am I going to put in learning concepts versus practicing questions? And does that vary by subsections? So a study plan is not just study X, Y, and Z. It also really says, to what extent am I studying for? How much am I studying, or what percentage of the time that I have am I devoting to this? And what am I studying? And you should have that chart in front of you if you're doing this. Anyone who's an eGMAT student and has written to our support team and has gotten a video and a PDF that which outlines the answers to these three questions, anyone of you has done that, has written to our support team, gets a PDF and a video that answers these questions, right? And you get that is a true study plan. And let me just kind of give you an example over here. Okay, so we're going to take two students, Abby and Chase. Okay, Abby is someone who's balanced in quant and verbal, and Chase is someone who's really strong in quant and consequently is weak in verbal. Okay, now you can see their starting score. So because Abby is balanced in both, her starting quant score is Q42, her starting verbal score is V31, and Chase his starting quant score is Q49, and verbal score is consequently V23. So with that, let's just make sure we get this. I want to figure out, who do you associate more with? And let me get my poll question here. So who do you associate with? Is it Abby or Chase? Let's see how many Abby's are there and how many Chases are over here. And again, I should have a poll which says none, because it is possible that you don't associate with either one. So, but yeah, I can see some of you have said Chase as me, and so on and so forth. We have a 50-50 split across. So let's kind of look at how both of them have, remember, identical starting scores, identical target scores, but their study plans are going to look very different. You look at this over here. So just to make things simple, and if you want, you might want to just write this down somewhere, get a pen and paper. Okay. Chase has Abby has a starting quant score of Q42, and that translates into a 42nd percentile. Again, this is it just happens to be, this is a score out of 60 and this is a score out of 100, but it just so happens that for 42 it translates into the same number. On the verbal side, it doesn't happen over here. She has a verbal 31 and translates into about a 60th percentile in all three. And again, I tried to keep things simple. There are about 50 combinations of Q42 and V31 in terms of these 5 abilities. Just to keep things simple, I said both of them should be identical in quant and very similar in verbal, whatever possible combinations exist. For Chase, he is at a 72nd percentile in both arithmetic and algebra geometry, and around that 35th percentile on the verbal side of things in each of the three subsections. Again, I've tried to keep things simple, which is why the numbers are identical. In reality, this is a very rare case that that's going to happen. Usually someone's stronger in SC, not as strong in CR, or no, someone stronger than CR, not as strong in SC or RC. But again, just wanted to keep things simple for you. Okay, so do you think they'll need the same quant and verbal score to get 740? Absolutely not. Okay. Do you think they need to put in the same amount of time? No. Do they need to study the same content? The answer is no. And let's kind of see how that is no. So the first thing you've got to do is that figure out what your target abilities need to be, and which is why we built a personalized study planner, or PSP. That's an AI-driven tool that allows everyone to build that personalized study plan. In fact, our students built about 10,000 personalized study plans last year in 2020. Okay. So what do? You actually put in these abilities over here. You can see, Abby has put in her abilities in PSP. It then gives Abby her target score. Hold on, why are my slides moving forward? And her target abilities in both quant and verbal. So you can see 65 percentile ability in quant and about that 90th percentile in every subsection in verbal. It then estimates how long Abby would take to achieve that. So for example, for sentence correction, what it's telling Abby is that, hey, to go from that 59th percentile to that 94th percentile, you need 2.1 weeks based on how much you've told me you're going to study on a weekday versus a weekend. So it takes into account how long you're going to study. Similarly, on the quant side of things, because she only has to get to that 65th percentile, she needs to put in just about 1.1 week. Now, if you were Abby, this is a bit counterintuitive to you. Why? Because your strength is verbal, and you're not going to put in, and you're putting in more time in verbal than in quant. Abby's putting in about 6 weeks in verbal and just about 3 weeks in quant. Doesn't that seem counterintuitive in many ways? Doesn't that seem counterintuitive if you were Abby? Hey man, I'm worried about quant, but yes, this is... Yes, but if you think about it, it also makes logical sense. Why? Because you're leveraging your strengths first, which is the right thing to do, and then focusing on your weakness, and you're focusing only the required amount. And the beauty of this is, because Abby is aiming for 65 percentile in quant, what does Abby not need to do when it comes to quant? Because she's aiming for 65th percentile. What does she not need to do in quant? Can you guys tell me? What does she not need to do? Not solve hard questions. Yes, she doesn't need to solve super hard questions in quant. Why? Because she's not aiming for a 51. Oh, she does need to practice, but she doesn't need to focus on uber hard questions, which, by the way, is not the case on verbal, where she's aiming for that 90th percentile. And again, this is, if you build the study plan right, you can get that clarity. Okay. All right, let's kind of talk about Chase. Chase is really strong in quant, so his study plan is built more around his strength in quant, and consequently, he's only supposed to do the required in verbal. Okay. Which means that, again, he needs to spend a lot of time on verbal as well, because he's really, really weak in verbal. But he needs to spend more time than Abby does on verbal. He needs to spend about 9 weeks on verbal. So just to summarize all of this over here, Chase versus Abby. Chase is aiming for that V40 and Q50. Abby is aiming for that V42 and Q48. For those of you who know the GMAT, you know Q50 and Q48 are very, very different scores. Okay. But that's not the big difference. The big difference is how much time they need. To get to a Q40, Chase needs to spend 50% longer on verbal than Abby does. And that's really, really important. Why? Because a lot of people say, man, my friend took 3 months to study for the GMAT and he got the verbal done in 2 months. I'm also going to get it done in 2 months. Doesn't that happen with you guys? You say, my friend got to that 740 score. You kind of look at your friend's study plan and say, I'm going to take a very similar amount of time. If your starting abilities are similar, that kind of still works. But if they are not similar, it will backfire. Why? Because if you need 9 weeks and if you budget 6 weeks, what's going to happen? You're going to rush through content, and as you rush through content, you're not going to study well, and even those 6 weeks will get wasted. Similarly, even though Abby is aiming for a Q48 and Chase is aiming for a Q50, Chase only needs 1.5 weeks, which is half the time that Abby needs to get to a Q48. Again, the same reasoning. You know, it's the difference in ability that determines how long it takes. Okay. Each one of you, even though their starting score was 600 for both of them, their target score is 740. The amount of time they need to get to their scores is this. Is it about the duration of time of studies? For this example, I've taken that put in identical amount of times during the weekday and the weekends. So Chase puts in 2 hours per day during the weekdays and about 4 hours per day during the weekend. But again, if that were different, again these timelines would be different, and the planner takes care of it. It has a neural engine that takes care of all of that. Okay. But then that's kind of not the biggest difference. I mean, so far, if this is enlightening, this is not the biggest difference. The biggest difference is where they spend. I mean, if you have 6 weeks on verbal, what are you doing during those 6 weeks? If you have 9 weeks on quant, where are you spending that time? Okay. So to do that, I want to introduce a model of stages of learning and how the ability improves with those stages of learning. So there are 4 stages of learning. One is learning concepts, the second is learning application, the third is mastering application, and the fourth is refining to perfection. And then there's one stage of maintenance, which is maintain your performance in this case. And as you cross these stages, you're going to find your ability improves. Okay. So when you learn concepts, you achieve that 25th percentile ability. When you learn application, once you learn application properly, you achieve that 50th percentile ability. Once you master that application, you kind of get to that 70th percentile. And this may seem low, but remember, ability is not an absolute measure. It's a comparative measure. Even when you do that, you still have certain chinks in your armor, and you want to fix those chinks. And when you do that, which is what we call as refining to perfection stage, that's when you reach that 90th percentile ability. And then after that, you can go into that steady state. A lot of people say, when I go from one subsection to another, I actually lose touch. I forget what I've studied. How many of you kind of feel that? And I've forgotten what I've studied. Okay. The reason why this happens is that you leave a subsection midway over here. Once you get to this point and you go from one subsection to another, this doesn't happen. It simply doesn't happen. Okay. If you leave it at learn application stage, if you don't finish master application and then move, it would happen with you. So let's kind of look at this and now tell me, given the stages of learning, where would Abby spend her time? Abby won't spend her time in SCCR and RC on learning concepts and application. Her ability already is around that 60th percentile. Okay. So where she's going to spend that time is on mastering application, okay, and refining to perfection. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Yes, no? If you are Abby and if you are on our platform, what I would ask you to do is essentially just do within our verbal courses revision B and then do cementing. That's basically all you need to do in each of the verbal subsections. If this were done on the quant side, where quant part actually has a more advanced architecture than the verbal side does, the quant part is actually just released this year in March of this year. There you have about 1,000 learning paths. So you don't even have to worry about what you study. As you go through this, the course automatically tells you what you do not need to study. So on the quant side, you don't even need to worry about it. But on the quant side, given her starting abilities, most of her time is going to spend in doing this. Remember, she's aiming for only that 65th percentile ability. She doesn't need to do this over here. Okay. And when you build a study plan, the success of whether the study plan leads you to your target GMAT score depends on whether whether you're spending time on the right things. Okay. Chase is going to spend time on absolutely different things. Chase is going to spend a lot of time on the basics because he is starting at a 34th percentile. He's going to go through the courses right from the very beginning, and then he's going to spend that time on refining to perfection to a certain degree as well. Now you can really see now why is it that Chase needs more time than Abby on every subsection of verbal. Why? Because he has this additional stage over here. Can you guys see that? Can you see this over here? Because he has this additional stage. And your study plan, you should have that clarity in your study plan. On the quant side, he is purely going to go to Scholarium and practice questions. That's it. And he's going to look at the analytics over there and figure out what are the chinks that remain in his armor and fix those. He doesn't need to go to the course at all. What is the difference between mastering application and refining? That's a great question. So mastering application means that the moment you really see a question, your brain automatically knows what needs to be done in step 1, step 2, and step 3, and you can do this around all the contexts in a particular subsection. And what are these contexts that I'm talking about? I'm going to explain with an example in about 20 minutes or so. Refine to perfection means that even when your brain knows how to do that, each one of you has certain natural strengths and natural weaknesses. So once you've mastered application, those natural weaknesses as you solve hard questions are exposed. So fixing those natural weaknesses is refining to perfection. Where do Abby and Chase stand on integrated reasoning? Great question. Okay, so if Abby and Chase hit their abilities in quant and verbal, they can probably do integrated reasoning in about a day and a half through our integrated reasoning course. And that's a good question. So, but the key thing over here is, even though they both started at the same point, both of them want to hit the same score, the time required and what they learn, that's very different. And that's something you've got to identify. And for each one of you, I want you guys to experience this level of personalization over there, and which is why we are offering some slots on our personalized study planner for you to do this. If you're an eGMAT student, this is something you should have. Okay, but if you're not an eGMAT student, then we have about, I think, 12 slots available on which you can do this. Okay, but if you're an eGMAT student, the first thing I want to do, and forgive me about this overlap, again, Adobe does some of this, make sure you attend onboarding sessions and attend the test readiness sessions as well. Okay, in addition to making your own personalized study plan. If you're not an eGMAT student, take a Sigma X mock test, which is the world's only mock test that gives you your starting abilities. It's actually the world's most accurate mock test. And then book a slot with one of our strategy experts to get that. So you can book your slot over here by clicking on this. I think about 12 slots available from what I know. If you're an eGMAT student, do you need to take a Sigma X mock before you make your study plan? Absolutely, Rashi. Or you should have your ESRs from a recent attempt. If you don't have your ESRs, you don't have your starting ability. There are two places where you can get your starting abilities. One is, your ESR. By the way, you'll end up spending $280 for it if you've not done that, or you take a free Sigma X mock. Okay. Now, Akash says, I often think why to target us for 740 when you know that 760 is higher, isn't it good to always target higher? Akash, that's a good question. What's going to happen if you go to a gym and really say, I'm going to start lifting 200 pounds? And yes, a college student can take a mock test. What's going to happen if you've never gone to the gym, you go to the gym and you're going to start benching 200 pounds? What do you think? You are going to hurt yourself. In the same way, even when you're aiming for a 760, get to a 700 first, man. Then you can aim for it. Right? It is about reaching 200 pounds. I mean, it's in your mind, you need to have those intermediate milestones. And if 760 is the score that you're aiming for, then aim for that 760. If 740 is the score that you're aiming for, aim for that 740. The problem is, if you want a 740 and you aim for a 760, your study plan is going to point you in the right in the wrong direction. Or it's going to be a non-optimized study plan. For example, in the prior case in Chase and Abby, if they set a 770, then even Abby will have to get to a Q50. And that again is counterproductive. Why? Because that quant is going to suck a bunch of our time, and each one of you has a limited amount of time. Okay. So aim for a score that you're truly aiming for, not higher, not lower. But we get one chance on GMAT, one chance to do what? The GMAT gives you 8 chances now, by the way. But one chance to do what? Okay. Now, a lot of you would be thinking, and how do you know this works? But if you didn't get a 760, then you use scholarships? No, you don't lose scholarships. Again, yes, 760 has a higher probability of getting scholarships. But remember this, if you have to first ask yourself, am I aiming for a 760? You've got to understand who you are. You know, a lot of people think 760 is just a number. They don't look at this and say, what does 760 mean? You know, 760 means you're aiming to be in the top 1 percentile of the smartest students in the world, not just a regular classroom, of the smartest students in the world. And yes, you see this on GMAT Club, where you see this glowing 760 story. But there is one thing that I will tell you, that for every one tree that bears fruit, there are 1,000 others that wither away. And what you don't see are those 1,000 others. And I can tell you this more than anyone else because of what I'm going to show you on the next slide. And how many of you have attended webinars where people have said, hey, a 730 is very easy, a 740 is very easy? How many of you have attended webinars and said, hey, if you do this X, Y, and Z, a 730 or a 740 is easy? Which webinars have you attended, by the way? Can you list the companies? That's okay. YouTube videos, ISB alumni, blah, blah, they say it's possible. Yes. And let me tell you, so the question is, why should you trust me? And let me actually add some credibility to this over here. When you look at GMAT Club, and I look at reviews on GMAT Club, and that's where where you should trust them. Why? Because on GMAT Club, every review is actually verified using a score report, and it's not a PDF that you upload. The score report must be linked to mba.com, which means a student to be able to provide a review needs to provide a live link linking to mba.com, which by the way is the same score report that you send to a B school. When you think about those reviews through those score reports, you're going to find over the last 5 years, we've had more reviews than anyone else has. We've delivered more 700 scores than anyone else has. Okay. In fact, we've delivered more 700 scores than all of these folks combined over the last 5 years or so. Now, this is over the last 5 years. What about the last 5 months? And this is data from Jan 1st to May 31st. How does that play out? So when you look at the last 5 months, there are about 190,700 plus scores that have been reported on GMAT Club. Out of these, 150 have been reported by 11 GMAT Club partners. The other 40 are by self-prep people who just study by themselves. Okay. And these are all the partners. And the reason you see 12 is because these two essentially are the same companies now. Okay. Now, how do these 150 break out? If you look at the 150 that have been reported by GMAT Club partners, 67 have been reported by our students, 44 by target test prep students. Everyone else combined over here is 39. So last 5 months, when I say that 700 is difficult, I know the trials and tribulations that students go through. And that's why you should trust us. Because we've delivered this, we know the effort that people put in. How about the last 5 weeks, which is April 27th to May 31st? These are the number of 700 plus scores that people have reported in the last 5 weeks. Again, you can verify this, go to GMAT Club's review section. All the scores are organized by recency. So when someone asks, tells you, this is easy, this is possible, ask them, where are the stats? These are reviewed, verified stats. No, not everyone. That's a great question. Does everyone who gets a 700 plus score report it with? No, not everyone. Only 20% of the folks report it. And 20% is a higher number. But the comparative stats still work, right? The comparative stats still work. Because we know, and at eGMAT, we track a lot of data. We know how many 700 plus scores we deliver every month. We can track it because if you hit a certain metrics within our platform, there's a 90% certainty you're going to hit a certain score. Does that make sense on the CR analogy piece? Does everyone who gets that 700 plus score report? Yes. But again, the comparison still works, right? In the same way as B schools report their salaries, not every student reports his or her starting salary. But the statistical comparison of salaries between a Harvard versus an ASU, that still works. Who is our biggest competitor? The way we work, you know, it's our biggest competitor is this number. The fact that we are at the top. That's our biggest competitor. And the fact that, that this can lead to us resting on our laurels. Because frankly, what we are doing, if you go look at our Scholarium launch, and Manas can share that, and you look at the work that we are doing, the kind of innovations that we are bringing to the market, people aren't even doing half of that. I mean, we spend about 3,000 hours a month on R&D every month. I don't think anyone's spending even 1,000 hours on R&D in a month. So, but yeah, I mean, if you want to know the history of eGMAT, how we started this as a company, then essentially, you know, look at that Scholarium launch video. What is the ratio of people who hit 700 plus and who do not, who are associated with eGMAT? That's a great question. So and at eGMAT, when you talk to me, you'll always see me talk in terms of segments, okay? Because segments are comparable entities. When you think about questions on the GMAT, you saw me talk about easy, medium, and hard separately in terms of their difficulty levels. If you look at pure customer count, okay, and to really say how many customers do we get versus how many of them hit 700 plus score, the answer to that is about 35%, okay? And by the way, no other prep company will tell you that. They say about 70% of their customers hit a 700 plus score, and those results don't add up. But 35% of our customers do. But when we get a customer, we also look at people who are diligent. And let me tell you what diligence means. Diligence means putting in 2 hours every day when you're studying SC till you don't finish it. When I look at people who are diligent and doing it when you're not watching YouTube during those 2 hours, not getting away. If you just look at those people, that's all that we ask from you. And the second thing that we ask is that you follow our study plan. If you look at that group, that number shoots up to about 80%. So what's the difference between a person who hits a 700 plus score and a person who doesn't hit a 700 plus score? If you were to take an inference from that? What's the difference? If you just take an inference on that? Diligence, yes. It is your diligence. The guys who get that score are the same folks who actually, and the guys who don't get the score are the same folks. How many of you, I mean, if you're an e-GMAT student, let me ask you very, very clearly, how many of you during those 2 hours go and watch a 3-minute long YouTube video? Let me ask that. How many of you do that? Yes. What do you think is going to happen on the takeaways that you got from that particular question? Is that a behavior of a 700 plus student? No. Why the hell do you think I know you guys do this? Because sometimes you send us screenshots. And I see, man, people have 10 tabs open. Not just eGMAT, there's YouTube, there's Times of India, there's New York Times, there's Wall Street Journal. That's data for me. It's like, what are these guys doing? So, I can give you the world's best course. I can give you the most personalized advice. I can't make you study. I'm not your parent, and I don't want to be. I have 2 kids, and I need to worry about them. But you are our students, and we can tell you the best practices. You are an adult. It's your job to achieve that diligence. Okay. No, we're not done with the webinar. We're done. We're going to get to the most important piece over here. How much time is required to get 750 from scratch? I don't know what scratch for you is, man. That's where the PSP comes in. Okay. But does that make sense? Is it possible to get a 780? Absolutely. What's the ROI? Typical ROI for people who get a 700 plus score is at least 1,000%. For 1,000 times, not 1,000%. If you 1,000 times is actually what? 100,000% actually. If you look at it in percentage. Okay. If you need 550, can you plan 600? No, just plan for 550, please. It's just, as I said, plan for the score that you need and be precise enough to hit on that. Just official guide, is that enough to hit a 750? How would you answer this question? Should I answer this question, or do you want to answer that question? Book recommendations to start quant prep from scratch? I don't recommend any book. I'll be very frank. Why? Because books are static. They don't give you feedback. Not because of the quality of content. I think some books have really good content, but they don't give you feedback. If you want to read a principle, you can read a book. But I mean, our courses are way more comprehensive than any books. Okay. Now, if you go to our YouTube channel, you watch some of the recent videos. We have a guy who works 7 days a week, but he still made sure that he's going to study for every day, and that's what diligence is. Okay, that's one of the other reasons I want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You have the world's largest collection of unedited videos and best practices by students. You're not going to get that anywhere. In fact, no other channel has even 1/10 as many videos, which kind of is in sync with our results of 700 plus scores. And again, you'll see the efforts that people make and ask yourself, am I making those efforts? Okay. Stage by stage PSP? PSP encompasses all stages. We don't like to give a stage by stage PSP for the reason that you're going to see me say in about 15 to 20 minutes. And you'll know why. Okay, with that, let me just go over here. What have we learned? You need that 730 plus score. To get that 730 plus score, you need to build ability. To figure out the most optimized way of building ability, get your personalized study plan. And then make sure that you know the stages of learning and you start at the right stage. Okay. Now let's get to the most interesting part. How do you execute on it? How do you get to that 90th percentile ability? How many of you are stuck at that 60th percentile ability in any subsection? It could be SC, it could be number properties, it could be CR, it could be RC. How many of you are stuck at the 60th percentile ability in any subsection? Okay, lots of you are. I'm going to tell you the difference between a 60th and a 90th percentile student, and which kind of is also going to actually play really well with what we've been talking about as to why do some people succeed and why is it that some people don't succeed. Okay. So a 60th percentile student means that you have about 80,000 students who are at the same level or smarter than you. A 60th percentile student in SC spends about 40 hours. His or her starting ability is 90th percentile, and capability is very similar to that of a 90th percentile student. By the way, both 60th and 90th percentile students work full time. 95% of our students work full time. A 90th percentile student is among the top 20,000 students, puts in the same amount of time, similar starting ability, and similar capability to excel. Look at how their outlook is, how different their outlook is. Okay, but one thing that I want you to remember is when you think about 90th percentile, you're thinking about achieving perfection. Okay, so a 60th percentile student looks at SC and says GMAT's intense correction is about learning, these 8 major error types, and you can see the error types over here. A 60th percentile student says the moment I see a intense correction question, I'm going to go for splits. Meaning is irrelevant, or meaning is only relevant if splits don't work. Okay. Number of feedback points while learning content, while learning application that a 60th percentile student gets is between 7 and 10, and a 60th percentile student spends most of his time practicing. Does that make sense for a 60th percentile student? If you're a 60th percentile student, does that make sense for you? This last piece over here. If you've studied sentence correction, this is how you've spent your time. Yes. A 90th percentile student looks at this and says GMAT sentence correction is about learning 200 error types which belong to these categories. And what are these sub error types? They come through the various sentence structures that are a part of sentence correction. Okay, and he focuses on learning those sentence structures in that phase 1. A 90th percentile student uses meaning as the primary method. Okay, remember, for him, meaning is not an error type. Okay, the number of feedback points that a 90th percentile student gets during learning is 10 times as many, at least 10 times as many. And accordingly, that 90th percentile guy spends 60% of his time learning and only 40% of his time practicing. And the reason why this guy needs only 40% of his time practicing is because of this. So can you see why is it that the 90th percentile guy needs a lot less time than a 60th percentile guy? Can you see that? What's the feedback point? We'll see that. Okay, but let's kind of understand what are these error types, 200 error types that you're worrying about in this case. Okay, so but the thing that I want you to remember is, if it truly is testing these 200 error types, can you even get perfection? Can you achieve perfection by getting 7 to 10 feedback points? Absolutely not. And let me illustrate that through an example over here. And the example that we're going to do is an SC question. By the way, where do these feedback points come in? When you're learning concepts, we give you 75 personalized feedback points in our SC course. when you're learning application, you get 23 personalized feedback points. So when we think about eGMAT, a lot of people think, hey, these guys make really good videos. No, we make good videos. We make great videos, which is why we have 4 out of the world's top 5 instructors working at eGMAT. But a lot of that also has to be coupled with technology that gives you feedback. So when you ask that question, how long would I take, how long will I spend while learning concepts? And why is it that you don't give a stage by stage time estimate? It's because, when we give you these feedback points, some of you may take longer than what we can estimate. Why? Because, if you're not serious enough, then you get the feedback that, hey, while doing the verb ing modifiers concept, you didn't score as high. You need to go back, revise those pieces. If I tell you you've got to finish verb ing modifiers in 30 minutes and your first go takes about 25 minutes, guess what you're going to do? You're going to rush through it. I don't want to do that, because achieving 90th percentile is about achieving perfection. Okay. And it's because of that feedback, the system lets you guide yourself. Okay. Again, each feedback point is built on 5 assessment items. So with that, let's kind of look at how is it that we do SC differently than most other people do. And to do that, I'm going to give you an SC question. And to do this, this is something you're going to do a lot tomorrow. This is a GMAT strategy session, so we're not going to be solving a whole lot of questions here, but tomorrow we'll be solving a lot more questions. And so the way we do this is we don't like to time you. So I want you, about 50 of you, to select still solving, so that way you guys time yourself, and when you 50 of you choose another option, then I know that you guys are done. So I need 50 of you. JP says, does the online module have live instruction? We used to have live instruction. It's just people said they don't need it. It's a waste of time because it's not personalized enough. And you can't make a live session personalized enough. Okay, 41 people have said still solving. Guys, I need 50 people to say still solving before I show the question. Come on, people, let's get there. All right, good. Let me remove broadcast results. And here is the question. So good luck, guys. I'm going to mute myself. Solve this question using the method that you typically use. All right, pretty much everyone's done. Get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. I'm going to broadcast the results so you guys can see how you guys did, how others did. Choice C is really popular. Choice D is very popular. Choice E is extremely popular, as is choice B. In fact, the least popular choice is choice A. I think there's a natural bias against choice A sometimes that I feel. But let me ask this question. So you've seen how people have done. How did you approach this question? If you guys can put your answers in. Hold on. Let me put in my short answer code, which I can't seem to be able to drag, but now it is there. How did you approach this question? If you can be so kind to put that answer in, that'd be great. Okay. And this is really telling over here. Understand meanings first, find the main clause, read the answers, SV pair, vertical scanning, meaning makes most sense. Okay, read all the 5 options, whichever made the clearest sense, I picked that. You can really see how people look at this over here. Active versus passive, or someone said that. Okay, and this is really interesting. Why? Because you see the preconceived notions that people bring into while solving SC questions. And this is meaning, try to understand the meaning SV contrast. Good. I like how I like that answer a lot. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this and we're going to see how we approach this question at eGMAT. The first thing is there are very few splits that exist in this question, frankly. I mean, and it's very difficult to do it using the splits approach. Why? Because you have choice A says the church coin, choice B starts with a while, as does choice C, but A and B have this contrast word but over here. Choice D has the again, and then choice C starts with this weird that, and they have this contrast word too. Okay, so let's kind of see how we approach this question using the eGMAT meaning-based approach, which is essentially the approach that you should look at if you want to solve SC questions. And by the way, this is an approach that we invented, and I want to use the word invented in 2010. Payal, who's our chief curriculum designer and the COO of the company, she's the one who invented this approach. This is the time when people said meaning doesn't exist in SC at all. In fact, I had a duel with Ron Purewal in 2010 on Beat the GMAT, where we were talking about meaning, and I gave him an example of where there are 2 questions where the 2 answer choices are grammatically correct, but one's incorrect because there's a difference in meaning. In fact, Stacy Koprinz in 2011, after a session with the GMAT, used one of those 2 questions as an example. So what's this meaning-based approach? In this meaning-based approach, what you do is you read the sentence, the original sentence that's given to you, you pause strategically, and you kind of extract the aspects out of the meaning till you understand what the author wants to communicate completely. And that's something that I want you to see how we do this. So in this, it's a fairly long sentence, and it's a perfect example of where the meaning-based approach actually shines through. But it works for every question that is there. The question says the church coined the date February 14th as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia, I don't know what it is, but let's call it L. That aspect is claimed by a few experts, but it is celebrated on this date to honor, so there's a second reason why it's celebrated, to honor the anniversary of Valentine's death or burial. That is the more prevalent belief. So when you think about this question and say, what is it that the author wants to communicate? Remember, I'm not even worrying about errors in this. All I'm trying to figure out is what are the intentions that the author wants to communicate. You see, the first thing that you see is, hey, there are 2 claims that have been mentioned about why February 14th is celebrated as Valentine's Day. The first claim is that the church designated it with a specific motive. The second claim is that it is to honor the Valentine's death or burial. The third aspect which is there, which is really important to this, is that claim 1 is made by a few experts and claim 2 is by another group, which is the more prevalent belief. By the way, none of these claims are made by the author himself. The author in this question is merely communicating information. How many of you, and let me actually make it more specific, when you were reading that question, before you went to answer choices, which of these aspects were you unable to identify? And this is a multiple response question, which means you can select 1, 2, or 3. Which of these aspects did you or could you not? And this is 1, this is 2, and this is 3. And the reason why this is really important is because if you did not identify one or more of these aspects, you will likely have answered this question incorrectly. And that's the way to build that error log. This is what we call as causal review of a sentence. If you're an e-GMAT student, you know this under the strategic review bucket. That is there. Which of these aspects were you not able to identify? That's really important to know. Aspect 3 is something that, is where people made the most mistakes. Aspect 2 is also where a significant number of you made mistakes. Aspect 1, of course, is something which most of you got. Thank you very much. And this is really important. This is learning. This tells you why you're faltering, where you're faltering. And if you know that, improving is very easy. This is a 700 level question. Yes. So we did that already. Okay. If you could understand all 3 aspects of the meaning, you're doing great. You are following the meaning based approach that is there. But if you couldn't identify 1, 0, or 1, or even 2 of these aspects, then you need to figure out what that meaning based approach is. You don't know what that meaning based approach is. Okay. And the thing which is there is, as questions get difficult, you've got to apply the meaning based approach. And to do that, you've got to pause on choice A and really say, what is it that the author wants to communicate? Okay. So with that, let's kind of look at our analysis and now figure out what are the errors in choice A. And what you see over here is that there are some subjects missing. There is no subject for is claimed, and there's no subject for this is over here, and there's a clear subject verb error, and a couple of you were able to actually point that out as well. So choice A is clearly wrong. Now that we've identified the errors, now we've identified the intended meaning, let's move forward. Okay, let's look at choice B, and I'm going to actually put in a poll on top over here. Let's go back to choice B. The way this is organized is, this is the original sentence. This is, why does it move forward? These are the 3 aspects that we identified. Okay. And below is choice B. Choice B is wrong as well. Choice B says, while with an ulterior motive to Christianize the pagan celebration of Lupercalia, a few experts do claim. Who has the ulterior motive in choice B? Who has the ulterior motive here? In choice B, is it church or is it the few experts? It is the few experts. If you look at the sentence structure, while with an ulterior motive to Christianize, a few experts do claim. Who is making the claim? The experts. Okay. Now, and with the church, that it's there that the church coined the February 14th as Valentine's Day, but the motive with which the church coined, that is completely lost. Okay, so the 2 reasons why choice B is wrong. Grammatically, it's absolutely fine, but it kills the meaning. Why? Because now the experts are claiming, and the second thing is the church's motive is the church's ulterior motive is completely lost. For those of you who chose choice B, can you see why this sentence structure changes the meaning? And how this sentence structure changes the meaning? For those of you who chose choice B, it was quite popular. 10% of you chose choice B, but 10 or 11 of you chose choice B. Can you see that? Yes, no? Guys, an acknowledgement would be good. Okay. Let's look at choice C over here. Choice C says, while a few experts claim that the church coined February 14th as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive to Krishna as a pagan celebration of Lupercalia, their more prevalent belief. Who is making both the claims in this case? In choice C? The experts. Is that what was intended in the original sentence? Is that what we intended? No, which is why choice C is wrong. Okay, it was different sets of people, and which is why that meaning analysis is really important, and which is why understanding errors in the context of sentence structures is really important. Okay, this choice is wrong. Why? Because it illogically suggests that the same set of experts shared the belief. I'm sorry, my slides are going haywire. People who chose choice C, do you now know why choice C is wrong? Can you see the power of that meaning-based approach? Can you see how not knowing sentence structures induce you into making errors? Let's look at choice D. You'll get the PDF and you can read. Choice D is a very interesting choice. It's actually the only close choice. It's incorrect. Okay, let's read choice D. Choice D says, the church coined February 14 as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive, blah, 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 as claimed by a few experts, but its celebration on this day is to honor this thing, the more prevalent belief. The problem with choice D is that it corrects a bunch of things. It adds the subject verbs. It actually has the right entity saying this, but the problem that it adds to this is that it is also the author who's making the claim along with these entities. So here, as with experts, the author is also adding weight to this claim, which was not the intention early on. And similarly, over here also, the author is also saying, but its celebration of this date is to honor this thing, the more prevalent belief. Here, the author is saying, I believe so, and that is also the more prevalent belief. And let me explain how is that happening in terms of the sentence structure. When you think about this simple sentence, Apple is the market leader is claimed by Forbes magazine. Are you communicating information? Are you communicating information? Yes, you are. You're telling someone Apple is the market leader, right? Are you as someone, are you making a claim by yourself? Are you making a claim here? No, you're not making a claim. You're just, Forbes is making a claim. Okay. Should you be blamed if it turns out that Apple is not the market leader? Absolutely not. You're merely communicating information here. You should not be blamed. Okay. Now, let's look at another sentence. Apple is the market leader as claimed by Forbes magazine. Okay. In this case, are you communicating information or communicating information? Yes. Are you making a claim here? Yes, you are. You are making a claim. You're saying this Apple is a market leader. Believe me, because Forbes is also saying that. Should you be blamed if it turns out that Apple is not the market leader? Yeah, Forbes is given as a validation. Absolutely. Yes. Do you see the difference in meaning in both the sentences? Yes, there's a huge difference. And that's what choice D does in both the claims. It makes author a co-communicator of those claims. You don't want to do that because that's not what the original choice intended to do. Okay. Which is why choice D is wrong. Grammatically, absolutely correct. Nothing wrong with this. Let's come to the correct answer here. Choice E, which a lot of you rejected because it says, man, there's a sentence starting with that over here. Someone says passive voice. That the church coined February 14th as Valentine's Day with an ulterior motive is claimed. That is claimed by a few experts, but the more prevalent belief is it is celebrated on this date to honor the anniversary of Valentine's death or burial. All aspects of the meaning are clear. There's no subject verb error. The clarity exists. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this, which is what makes it the correct choice. A lot of people say, and they reject this. The reason why people reject this is they say, I've never seen a sentence that starts with that. Okay. There's a second that over here, which is they say there has to be the second that. And then some people think passive voice is wrong. Okay. Again, I don't know where people hear this. Some people think being is wrong. And again, it's not wrong. Okay. And these are things that people teach you when they teach you tricks. They really say, hey, all these things are wrong and I can help you save time on the GMAT. One thing I want you to take away from this is learn methods. You will never face a problem with timing on the GMAT. This is an eGMAT question. This is not an official question. And this is a 700 level question. Okay. So, and this is actually a very current trend question over here. No, the author is not communicating. Read that sentence again, you'll see it. Okay. So but the reason why you made the mistake over here has nothing to do with grammar. It is a failure to understand the meaning distortion. Again, the first one, if you chose choices, there's very few of you, that was a sentence structure issue. But you can see over here, can you see over here as to how meaning becomes important? Can you see how meaning helps you get there? And which kind of is the answer to the same question. How do you select among the last two answers? Had you focused on the meaning, you would have rejected choice D to begin with. That should have been among the last two answers. Okay. Within the time slot, it is difficult to assimilate the nuances leading to meaning distortion. It's not. If it were difficult, our students won't be the ones who would be getting 5 times as many 700 plus scores as the average GMAT Club. Actually 10 times as many if you look at the recent stats. Had that been the case. Would it be if this method were difficult to apply within the required time slot? No, it won't be, right? It won't be. The stats won't be there. Are grammatical errors to be ignored even if meaning is being conveyed? No, they're not to be ignored. But there are no grammatical errors over there. You think there are because you think passive voice is wrong. You think being is wrong. You think a sentence cannot start with that. And I don't know who told you that. Eliminating D was tough, I agree. But you learned something from that, right? Next time you're not going to make that mistake. And which is the beauty of this process. You figure out exactly why you made a mistake. And if you have a great solution, which is where if you look at Scholarium, you'll find super detailed solutions. Then you're not going to see that. Jamboree faculty conveyed that. I mean, I don't even know if Jamboree is still a thing in the GMAT world. So again, I'm not. Again, first of all, even if you want to consider someone as there, please consider GMAT Club partners. Those are people who at least invest in GMAT preparation. And being is not wrong. In fact, I think I have an article somewhere where we talk about we did this in 2013, where we actually showed there are about 6 correct SC questions where being is used in the correct option. If you Google being the black sheep, Manas, if you can share that, please. Being the black sheep, you're going to be able to see that so. Okay. So remember this, if you want to hit that 90th percentile, you will have to go through these stages of learning. And the takeaway that I want you to have is what you do at different stages is very different. Okay. And that 90th percentile is all about building the right foundation, learning the right method, and refinement. And you need feedback at each of these points. Why? Because if you don't get feedback, you'll have holes over here, you will have holes over here, and you will have holes over here. And you need feedback, you need technology to capture the right moment, right piece over here. We don't have that built-in technology, which is why at eGMAT we build all of our technology. We have 7 people full-time who just do tech. Okay, because 90th percentile requires that perfection in all areas. You leave those chinks in your armor, you are not going to achieve that 90th percentile. You can throw that MBA dream out. So just for SC, how many points of feedback we give? You can see that over here. In CR, that number's even higher. Okay, and here are some case studies over here where that feedback has worked beautifully. Here's a guy, Jim Yee, one of our students, gave his first attempt, scored a 71st percentile. Clearly CR was an issue, SC was somewhat of an issue, RC was there. We worked with him, he was not using pre-thinking. In 20 days, he improved from that 700 to that 770. You can see that improvement in CR that happened. You can see that improvement in SC that happened. Again, all this was the meaning-based approach. You didn't focus on RC. You can see the percentile remain more or less the same. And he wrote this debrief over there. Trust the process. How do you go from V34 to V42? And he says, achieving V40 plus is very difficult just by memorizing and repeating. This guy is a Canadian, a Chinese Canadian. He's studied 80% of his life in Canada. He actually just got into GSP Chicago as well as Columbia. And he says SC, solid grammar is there, but grammar plus meaning. It's not that you don't need grammar. You know, you needed that grammar to identify that the subjects were missing, but grammar and meaning, or meaning and grammar, will help you there. And when it comes to CR, you've got to learn how to pre-think. Okay. You can watch his interview with me. He actually, again, as I say, our students give back. He also did a wonderful session on how do you get into GSP Chicago and Columbia. And you can read his debrief as well. So he is that #1 guy over here. You can read Jimmy. Kim, again, one of our former students, went from V37 to V44. Again, you can see the abilities improve over here. You can see her go from 51st percentile in RC and 87th percentile in SC to 99th percentile in SC and that 93rd percentile in RC. Again, even when you are at that high percentile, refinement can help you get higher. Okay. So how do we provide feedback? What's a feedback point? When you learn any entity on eGMAT platform, we evaluate you, we give you a score. Okay, we track how long you're putting in. And for this particular student, you can see that he scored low over here, but he spent this time revising, which is why you see the 47 minutes here, which is why you essentially see that he did really well on the next file. This is just a subject verb block within the paid portion of the course. Then in verb tenses, you can see he spent a lot of time in verb sequencing, which is a complex concept. He did score a 64% here, but then he scored a perfect 100% over here. The reason why he did that was because, again, he revised. Why do we know this? Because we went down in that quiz and we saw that he bookmarked these questions. Okay, and that's really important to know. And for him, again, it took him 3 attempts. The reason it took him 3 attempts was because he didn't apply the meaning-based approach. And when he started using eGMAT, he started applying the meaning-based approach, he actually acted on the feedback that the platform was giving him. Getting to that V38 was fairly easy. Okay, so again, get that personalized study plan. And if you're not a paid student, take a Sigma X mock, work with a strategy expert. I don't know if there are slots available. I'll be happy to share the link once again. Okay. With that, again, to summarize, make sure you aim for that high GMAT score. Make sure you understand that to get to that score, You need to build ability. To start building ability, start with a personalized study plan, then make sure you go through the stages of learning that you're required for each subsection and take feedback into account. All right. With that, I want to thank you guys for joining me today. Let me share the session PDF. Here's a study plan link for those of you who are still looking for it. Again, forgive me if the slots are over. We typically have limited slots. And let me put in the session PDF. Here's the session PDF. Do European B schools provide less scholarships? Yes, they do. Typically, they do. Yeah, I mean, they do have scholarships. I will say that, but not as they don't have as much scholarship money as the USB schools do. And again, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also connect with me on my LinkedIn. I post about 5 articles on my LinkedIn every week or so. So you're gonna be able to. And if you want to connect with students at other top B schools, you'd be able to do that through my LinkedIn. So let me provide you the link to my LinkedIn as well. And in all the free webinars are here's the link to my LinkedIn. Okay. Can I brief you guys with courses and fee structures? We primarily have one course. 80% of our students buy our GMAT online course. That's $349. That's basically it's as simple. You can pretty much find whatever information you need on our website, or you can write to me at rajat@e-gmat.com. Okay. Do campus placements happen within the US universities? Top B schools, yes, they do have campus placements, but I'll tell you one thing. If you are going for an MBA, learn to become a hunter. The best jobs are done through networking. All of the folks who I showed, in fact, and which is where you should also look at, let me share the link of MB Analytical, where we have about, we invite 1 to 2 students every month who are former students who are studying at top B schools. And they're going to talk about how they went about hunting for a job. Let me see if I can get you that link to MB Analytical. So here's a link to MB Analytical over here. And if you look at some of the students where we've talked about career progression, you'll see both instances where people have been recruited on campus and where people have found jobs through personal networking. What about LBS? LBS does provide scholarships. We also have a student from LBS, Shamir, who's narrated his experience over there as to how he got his job. But LBS does have campus placements, yes. Can eGMAT arrange scholarships too? We don't do admission consulting. I mean, one of the two things that you're going to really see, if you remember the chart that I showed you with regards to the number of 700 plus scores, one of us and TTP accounted for about 75% of all 700 plus scores. We accounted for about close to 50%. And the reason is that we focus just on the GMAT, and it allows us to achieve that excellence. We know a lot about admission consulting. We are one of the largest sponsors of AGAC, which is an association of graduate admission consultants. But it's just that it's not something that we can do at scale, which is why we choose not to do it. But yes, when it comes to knowing about admissions, yes, we do know a lot. All right. Any other question? We actually talk to admission officers every year through the AGAC conference. So JP says, I'm currently in the US and scheduled an appointment for 2:30 a.m. Eastern. Is it possible to be flexible? JP, again, if you schedule an appointment, but you can cancel it and write to me, someone will accommodate. Again, this is a time when we are going through, this is kind of the peak season. So I'm sure there's a slot available in a couple of days. I can't promise next year. I'm not the one who takes on these calls. Let me just be very clear. So, but again, you can write to me, and I'm sure someone will respond to this. Is the pandemic affecting the job markets of MBA grads as per you? Actually, the pandemic has made the job markets a lot better. MBA hiring is actually really good, because what people have recognized is that, in the current job market, more and more people are more and more companies are doing a digital transformation, and MBAs are considered to be, among all graduates, the best among navigating through change, because MBAs have a very holistic overview of all functional aspects of a business. When is an MBA not worth it? Okay, that's a great question. And it's a question that a lot of people don't ask, but it's a really important question. And I think, when is an MBA not worth it, and for whom is an MBA not worth it? And I think so. There are two things which is there. One is, if you're in a technical role, whether it's in supply chain, whether it's in coding, whether it's in program management, and you're doing really well, and you've been progressing well in the career, and you can see a clear progression, then, and at that point, and if you want to continue in that career, that is, and at that point, I think an MBA, just spending 2 years for a full-time MBA is not worth it. The courses are still worth it. So at that point, I would recommend that you either go for a part-time MBA, or B, take on specialized courses, and there are those courses that are there. The second thing, when I would think that an MBA is not, I wouldn't say it's not worth it, but you have to be very careful with which MBA you choose, as if you want to become an entrepreneur right after an MBA. And that point, you've got to be very careful with regards to the schools that you choose. I mean, I wouldn't choose Tuck, for example, for entrepreneurship. So those are the two things that come to mind when I say an MBA is not worth it. So again, if you want to go deep into one single field, which is not a direct business related field, but a more technical area, if you want to be a biotech researcher, if you want to, again, be someone who want to work on who wants to work on, let's say, self-driving cars, then I wouldn't recommend you do an MBA. Why would you do an MBA? How many mocks are in the package of eGMAT? So we give 5 Sigma X mocks, but we also have our amazing Scholarinium platform, in which you can take ability quizzes. So overall, with regards to the number of questions that you get enough questions to build up to and simulate up to 20 mocks. And again, as you go through the 3 stages of learning, you won't need that many mocks. We also, if you want to buy the official mocks, you can buy those at a discounted price of $70 rather than paying, I think, $89 or $90 from the GMAC, because we actually buy them in bulk from them, so you can get 5 plus 6 that way. I mean, if you need more than 7 mocks in all, then you're doing something very wrong. Win says, should a PGDM pass out? Don't use the word pass out. Pass out has a very different meaning in the US. But graduate from a tier 2 college from India, should you go abroad primarily from a better brand name? Oh yes, a lot of people do that. I mean, forget about tier 2. I have seen folks from IIMs go for an MBA abroad. So yeah, it doesn't lessen the chances, because a lot of B schools in the US know a lot about Indian students. They understand, a lot of Indian students just do an MBA right after graduating. Which schools are good for an entrepreneurial path? So Stanford's really good. Babson is a tier 2 school, which is really good. They're ranked number 1 for entrepreneurship. MIT is very good for tech entrepreneurship. Let me actually share an article. So a lot of these questions, if you just Google eGMAT plus the question, you should get really good answers. So let me get you this link. Best B schools for strategy consulting. I would start with Tuck, Harvard. Pretty much all top schools are really good, I would say, for strategy consulting. Uh, so uh, let me. Here's an article that we wrote in 2019, but I can just tell you, consulting is one of the core areas. So every B school is going to be, every top B school is going to give you a pretty decent options for consulting. Okay. Can I cover on the mock test? Can you elaborate that question? Harshad says the idea of being a hunter seems daunting as it is not mainstream within India. Yes, it is not, and that's what I hate about it. I absolutely agree. But remember, once you start to become a hunter, you will never go hungry. You will actually have the confidence of asking the amount of money that you are asking for. With 10 years of MBA, is it worth doing, and with 10 years of experience, is it worth doing an MBA, since 1 year MBA program in the US has many prerequisites? So Arvind, I think the question really is it worth, have we seen students? Yes, many students. In fact, I think there are quite a few on our YouTube channel as well. But let me just share a link. And I think Leo was also towards the older side when he started as MBA, the guy who's doing this. Let me just share another link with you. Here's a link of a student who got into Keenan Flagler at an age of 38, and he thinks it's worth it. So that's one piece. And there's another article, if you search eGMAT MBA after 30, you'll see this. Murthy says, I have 10 years of work experience with L&T. Will my higher work experience be a problem of applying to B schools with 7.4 CGPA to get into your top? Murthy, first of all, IIT Chennai or IIT Madras is a really good pedigree. Just get a 740, man. I mean, you'd be fine. L&T is not going to be a problem. Okay. So yeah. Does a student who's studying digital business need to have a higher business score? So Stephanie, given your name, I'm assuming you are you're European by descent, and in that case, I think your median GMAT scores should be around the median GMAT scores plus minus 10 points of the median GMAT scores at school. So digital business is not a highly competitive field. Financial aid plans. What do you want to know about financial aid? You have got to ask me. I mean, frankly, here's the thing that I will tell you point blank. If you get into a top B school, even if you don't get a scholarship, it's worth it. You're going to find that people do really, really well. You get loans, pretty much all business schools, top business schools, that is, guarantee loans, and those loans are at really low interest rates. So I wouldn't worry about a financial aid. I wouldn't worry about taking 200 grand worth of loan. I mean, most of you, once you graduate from a top B school, would be making 200 grand or more 5-6 years from now, 5-6 years post graduating. So that's kind of the loan amount that you would make, and so yeah, I wouldn't worry about the loans. I've seen just so many examples. Does work experience matter while taking admissions? Absolutely. That's about 70% of your application. It matters a lot. Does age count for a full-time MBA in one of the top universities if you're 38 years or more? It does. I'll be very frank. And I'll tell you why it does and then how to counter that. So the reason it does is because, if you are that old, then especially if you're in the US or in Europe, you're already making 150 grand or more, especially if you have had a good career. And then B schools worry about the ROI that MBA program is providing. And so that's one piece. The second piece that they worry about is the fit within the class. If you're going to sit with 25-year-olds, are you going to just overwhelm them, overpower them, because your experience gives you that many brownie points? So those are two problems you need to address. Now, how do you go about addressing those problems? First is identify why the need for an MBA now is there. okay, and how you're going to benefit from it despite the fact that you're doing this late in your career. And the second is show how you can add unique value without being overpowering. Okay, so if you can do that, Adrian, you can still get on an MBA. I remember in 2017 I visited UCLA. Their oldest student in their full-time MBA class was 47 years old. In my class when I did an MBA, the oldest student was 39. Kamal says, I have a CA plus CFA with 7 years of diversified experience and 740 on the GMAT. Can I get into top B schools? I don't know. He seems so, and I'll be very frank, but I don't know why, because a CA plus CFA only tells me that A, you're a smart student. A GMAT tells me that you're a smart student. But beyond that, what kind of experience do you have? What kind of leadership, how have you demonstrated leadership? And which is where, again, as you watch the interviews, I'm going to share one very interesting session that we did with the student, that I did personally with students from Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton, and into how to portray leadership. And in that session, you're going to find the questions that I asked, and these are some of our former students, as to how they portrayed leadership, and it'll truly tell you what that leadership is. And this is the same question that you would ask. Graduate from a top undergrad college in India, got placed in Big Three. What could I add to make it to a good profile for Ivy? Look at what these people have done. I'm going to share another session with you, again along the same lines. Let me just check where that session is. Take a look at this session over here. Minimum work X, typically 3 years is what I would say. What is the age band for top B school? Again, guys, these are stuff that's available online. So I've talked about the average work experience. 3 years is the minimum, average is 5. What are the things that you have to worry about if your undergrad CGPA is not good? Again, attend this session that we have this week. This guy who got into Wharton didn't have a great CGPA either. So attend this one. You're gonna figure out how he actually addressed his low CGPA. Should more experienced candidates not go for an eMBA instead of full-time MBA? That's a good question. So eMBA is, again, I'm going to talk about from the US and European perspective. In India, an eMBA is completely different. In India, an eMBA is something that IIMs have cooked up, where they want to provide a full-time MBA to someone who has 5 or more years of experience. Then they've called it an executive MBA, but it essentially is a full-time MBA. There's nothing executive about it, to be very frank. And I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just trying to say they've used the word executive MBA, but they're not offering an executive MBA. So with that, let me explain what an executive MBA needs to be. An executive MBA in the US, which is where the notion started from, is designed for someone who's actually on a fast track career path, who's doing really, really well, and has about 40% of the skills that an MBA usually possesses, but needs those other 60% and needs to do it while working full time. So when you do an executive MBA in the US, you are typically company sponsored or company recommended, or you work in a startup. So if you go to Wharton executive MBA, you typically would work in a startup, or you'd actually be company sponsored. The company actually pays for your executive MBA because they're investing in you as an individual, because they see you as a high potential VP, EVP kind of person. So that's what an executive MBA in the US is. Now, what happens to people who still want to work in their careers and don't want to leave their jobs? For them, there's the part-time MBA. It's still part-time. You can still do it while working, and yeah. So that's the difference between an executive MBA truly and a full-time MBA. Full-time MBA is typically for career change or function as well as as well as the industry change. An executive MBA is more for career retention. Does 29 make you less desirable than 28? No, it doesn't. Okay. Shikhar, will your profile be an issue for this? No, your profile won't be. What you've achieved and what you've not achieved is something that's going to be more of a point to prove, not 30 years, not. How do you show leadership in a tech giant company? Watch those interviews. There are some tech giant folks who worked at tech giants over there. Okay. All right, guys. With that, I think your questions are more towards an MBA, not in the scope. Of this. If you're an eGMAT student, send those questions to me, and we'll answer those questions or get those questions answered, guys. But other than that, I want to thank you for joining me in this webinar. It was a pleasure hosting you for this duration, and I hope to see you guys on tomorrow's session as well as later on the free trial at eGMAT.com. Thank you and have a good day.